The next lecture is in memory of Georgi Plekhanov, a Russian revolutionary and a Marxist theoretician. He was a founder of the social democratic movement in Russia and was one of the first Russians to identify himself as Marxist. Facing political persecution, Plekhanov emigrated to Switzerland in 1880, where he continued in his political activity attempting to overthrow the Tsarist regime in Russia. In January 1895, Plekhanov published his most famous work, The Development of the Monist View of History. This lecture is titled, Notes on a Dispossession, How Have We Read Marx? And will be delivered by Professor Elvira Concheiro. This lecture will be chaired by Professor Ajit Sinha. Can I request the speaker and the chair to please come on stage? Ajit Sinha is a professor of economics at Azim Premji University. He obtained his MA in economics from the University of Delhi and PhD from the State University of New York in Buffalo. He's the author of Theories of Value from Adam Smith to Piero Sraffa, A Revolution in Economics, The Economics of Piero Sraffa, and Essays on Theories of Value in the Classical Tradition. He has also co-edited several volumes and authored more than 40 research papers. I request the chair to now take over the proceedings.
Thank you. No, it's not. Okay. Now it's working. Well, welcome to the lecture number 24, Gregory Plekhanov Memorial Lecture. The lecture is, the speaker is Professor Elvira Concherio, right? Okay. Yeah, Concheiro, okay. She is a very distinguished Marxist scholar, and you have her profile here in the book, so I won't read it to you. She is professor at UNAM in Mexico. Where is? Let me just find it and read it for you. Yeah. Elvira Concheiro is a professor at UNAM, Mexico, at the director of Memoria, a highly reputed Marxist journal. She is also the director of the research group on Marxism at the prestigious organization Classico. The research group she coordinates is called Heritages and Perspectives of Marxism. So she would speak for about 35 minutes, and after that, hopefully, we'll have about 10 minutes for question and answer. Elvira.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It's okay? Okay. Good morning. Thank you very much. Before anything else, I want to thank you all for being here. And in particular, I want to express my enormous gratitude to the organizers of this conference. I'm truly honored for this invitation, which allows with me today the 20 years commemoration of Karl Marx's birth, to share with you some ideas I have been working on for several years. Everyone here knows we are speaking of someone of great importance who left his work as a patrimony of human knowledge. We also know that this work has fundamental consequences in terms of social transformation. A work that we must constantly analyze. To use a metaphor, his work is like a river. That is to say, a work that remains the same, but has different currents that run through of its page, that are continually transforming them. Because of multiple consequences, we are forced to rethink the legacy left by Marx again and again. I want to present some ideas regarding what I have titled Notes Toward a Disposition, How Have We Been Reading Marx. I do it from the situation of extreme violence and social and political decomposition of my country, Mexico, but also I do seize the perspective of transformation that in recent years have opened in Latin America. Both things gives a sense of urgency to consider in an integral way how Marx has been interpreted. At least, what are the principal consequences of those interpretations? Specifically, what are the consequences of our current moment, where there is a tendency to explore certain authors of our currents isolate in a disjointed way. Without recuperation, what is without doubt a rich interconnected history. This is something Eric Hobsbawm showed us during his time in one of the finest attempts of highlighting this interconnected history. Of course, this is a very broad subject that has already spanned a century and a half, and that can only be carried out collectively. Here we will only address an aspect that seems particularly relevant to us, which allows us of the think about the current approaches to Marx's work. What I'm saying is that we are highly indebted to the various readings of Marx in relation to the knowledge we have developed up to his point of an extraordinarily complex and important thinker. I am also saying that there are clear limits we have in approaching and comprehending his work. This is not an innocent subject and has a lot of political reasons. Without doubt, linking the various interpretations and moods of approaching Marx with the political views and postures that are behind them, allows us to understand the scale of the problem that we face. We must remember that is the political stance behind the analysis that has always defined how the figure and work of Marx has been treated. Furthermore, it's against the political stance that can explain something as absurd as declaring Marx's work dead with the fall of the Berlin Wall. It is clear that Marx has engaged in multiple political battles that continue into our time. Certainly since the second half of the 19th century up to the present, Marx's work has been read in many different ways, yet always grounded in the specific historical circumstances and the question of the time. This is something absolutely natural, which can be very productive. The problem has been to confuse these historical located questions and concern with those of which Marx in his time could have had. In particular, the problem has been to ignore Marx's place of enunciation. Here, I want to highlight the fact of the political consequences of Marx's works do not correspond to the acknowledgement of the analytical work that existed within all his work about precisely the political. This is a result of the unique way in which Marx engaged the political. From the studies of the punctual conflict from which the relation of the political arises, a process that cannot happen mechanically, but complexly and in a different sphere that acquires a relative autonomy. Understanding the state as guarantor of the norm that arises from the violence of the conflict between segments of society is for Marx a clue to follow in order to articulate the analysis and enter into the understanding of the internal interconnection of the social totality. That is the reason why we will not find a separated theory about the sphere of the political, which led to strip Marx's political soul from his work. Alongside of this dispossession of a political theory, or more precisely of the theory of the state, or the theory of the party, political party, as various authors have argued, it's been establishing the idea that the scientific work of Marx, Capital, is an economic work, or in the best case, a work of critical economy. After 150 years since the publication of its first volume, this bias has mostly impeded an integral approach to capital, a necessity in order to unearth the entirety of its political consequences. I argue that Marx has often been approached in a fragmented manner, dispossessing him of his integrality, as was explicitly done by Soviet Marxism when they found the formula that allowed it to complete Marx with the qualities that are highlighted in Lenin. That fragmentation began early. During Marx's life, in certain contexts, the concern was at the pinhole in him, though for some, he was an economist, and for others, a philosopher. Issues that for the German Revolution didn't deserve anything else than being ridiculed because of the poverty of analysis they showed and the intellectual rivalry expressed between British and Germans. These issues were not a concern to the workers, though. Marx's worries were different in relation to the possible readings of the workers' parties, an example of which was shown in his debate with Ferdinand Lassalle, or years afterwards with members of the German Social Democratic Party. Concern he left expressed in comments in the margin of the Gotha program. Years before, he also sustained intense debate with Proudhon and afterwards Bakunin and the anarchists regarding, among other things, his rejection of the political struggle to fulfill the objectives of workers. Once Marx died, the debate provoked by the position of Edward Bernstein was made particularly relevant through a dispute within the worker parties. This dispute related precisely on how to best understand the political consequences of the different readings of Marx. It was thus not a naive or superficial reading made by the workers' movement of the revolutionary German. On the contrary, in many ways, they were more complex interpretation than those that the academic medium later realized. But it was also where the fragmentation of the German revolutionary theoretical work began. It was Bernstein who separated himself from the party of which he was a leader and one of its main theorists, who carried out one of the first fragmentation of Marx. His argument, as of known, was that the dialectical method taken from Hegel results in serious errors in the scientific construction of Marx. From this would arise the idea of scientific Marx contaminated by a militant Marx, of a historical materialism that searched to eliminate the dialectic as a means to found a thoroughgoing opportunistic theory, a theory of evolution without revolution, and of natural development into the socialist without any conflict, as sustained Georgi Lukács. As is well known, there was a rapid response to that Bernsteinian position from Karl Kautsky, Rosa Luxemburg, and after Lenin of then Gramsci, when we well into the 20th century will continue debating Bernstein's stances, and they were present in the worker movement and they're relevant to political strategy. In those responses, until of time, it is common to find a Marxian scientific approach separated from or even opposite to his political activity and political stance. Due to the past century, together with the lack of understanding of the role of political struggle, in Marx's theoretical perspective, we are recurrently faced with the fragmentation of Marx's approach, particularly from a certain scientific positivism with which he has often been read, the author of Capital, in many interpretations. In contrast to that vision, that assigned various disciplinary adscription to Marx, we must remember the emphasis that years later, the Hungarian Marxist Georgi Lukács, to refute Bernstein's position, put on the relevance of Marx's methods that allows him to highlight the concrete totality, not only as the really object of his analysis, but as the epistemological perspective that distinguishes him from all others. It is the same perspective that allowed the emergence of the diverse sciences. It is the result of a perception of the facts that derive from the fetishistic character of the material relations that rareify all human relations. Remember back to Lukács. In this way arise isolated facts, isolated complexes of facts, separate specialist disciplines, economics, law, etc. In those appears extraordinarily scientific to think out the tendency implicit of the facts themselves and to promote this activity to the status of science. By contrast, in the teeth of the old death, isolation, and insulating facts and partial system, dialectic insists of the concrete unit of the whole. Yet, although it exposes this appearance to the illusion, they are albeit illusions, necessarily engendered by capitalism. In this scientific atmosphere, it still gives the impression of being an arbitrary construction. Thus, in an environment where various scientific disciplines opened up, generating enormous expectation and introducing new fields of knowledge, it was not easy to remove Marx from those disciplinary modes, even from those that maintained the perspective of the concrete totality, so they began to develop studies that spoke in the name of a supposed Marxist economy, or Marxist historical, or Marxist philosophy, etc. Antonio Labriola was one of the first Marxists to react against this vision that was beginning to be dominant, and as it's known, he supported the idea that Marx had eliminated the separation between the various sciences, and in particular, any distinction between science and philosophy. For Labriola, Marx's work does not belong to any speciality, and formulated the idea that the science of the author of Capital was the critic as such. As said Manuel Sacristán, Labriola means the work of Marx in rupture with an old tradition in the theory of knowledge and of the science, the tradition classist, mystified, and fetishistic. In the same way, and surely inspired by the work of Labriola, Lenin opposed a vulgar Marxism that handled the categories of timeless and isolated way, and proposed to understand sociology as a science to understand the study of the social economic formation as a whole. With that, he sought to acquire its scientific character through the perspective of Marx's social totality. Although he didn't insist on the subject of discipline, Lenin's work has great relevance in the creation of a current that in the core of Marxist thought renews the readings from the perspective of totality and from the concrete analysis from which derives a strategy for the revolutionary transformation that completely modify the political forms during a good part of the 20th century. Unfortunately, the work of Antonio Gramsci was for many years unknown and manipulated due to both his condition as a prisoner of Mussolini fascism and his premature death. But today, we know of the immense contribution that the Italian communist leader gave us, in particular in his notebooks of the prison. In reference to what we are dealing with, Gramsci not only shared the perspective of Labriola and Lenin, but his emphasis on Marxism as a philosophy of praxis brought up again to the discussion to the dominant economist and mechanistic views, and thus opened a wide spectrum in the studies of the political standing from the line of thought inaugurated by Marx. In an opposite direction, after Lenin's death, Soviet Marxism had found the perfect formula to keep the fragmentation of Marx and to legitimize the new power. Marxist-Leninism was present as current of thought completed by the work of two unforgettably people, Marx and Lenin. These two were presented as part of a formula where one corresponded to the scientific part, the theory, and the other to the revolutionary struggle, the practice. Like that, for decades, it remained established that Marx lacked a theory of the party, among many other questions. In this context, the debate introduced by Althusser held enormous possibilities. And today, in postmodern conditions, it is one of the aspects the new generation seeks to recover. The French communist philosopher added several elements, only one of which I will mention here. The separation between the young and old Marx, which correspond to the division between the humanist Marx and the scientific Marx. This vision, as we know, was elevated with the cutting idea that in its moment was shocking, the idea that the scientific work of Marx had to be sought out only in the economic terrain, ending with the idea that the German revolutionary lacked a theory of the state. If we observe these dominant readings, we see they have done nothing more than cut, separate, and fragmented. As such, Capital is full of specific theories, and the idea that is now so popular is full of concepts that can be explored in and of themselves. While in relation to above, to remember again the posture of George Lukács. Marxism, however, simultaneously raised and reduced all specialization to the level of aspects in a dialectic process, right, Lukács. This is not to deny that the process of abstraction engenders the isolation of the elements and concepts in the special disciplines and whole areas of study is a very essence of science. But what is decisive is whether this process of isolation is a means toward understanding the whole and well it's integrated with the context it proposes and requires, or whether the abstraction knowledge of an isolated fragment retains its autonomy and becomes an end in itself. In the last analysis, Marxism does not acknowledge the existence of independent sciences of law, economics, or history, etc. There is nothing but a single, unified, dialectic and historical science of the evolution of society as a totality. From within a French academy which invoked the method of the natural science and emphasized in the importance of disciplines, Henri Lefebvre was one of the most insistent voices that warned about the uses of pigeonholing the thought of Marx. Marx's thought cannot be introduced in those narrow categories, right, Lefebvre. Philosophy, political economy, history, or sociology. From him, in her well-known text, The Sociology of Marx, for him, the social process that Marx studies cannot be reduced to any speciality. And in more recent times, David Harvey pointed out the important issues of giving integrality to analysis within the Marxist perspective and incorporated the geographical vision into the constitutive body, not as sample aggregate, but within the perspective of the whole. He proposed to contemplate not only historical temporality, which insists on speaking of Marxism of historical materialism, but also the concrete speciality in which it occurs. Despite those lucid voices, what is certain is that the general tendency was, and still, of the understand Marx from one of these partial points of view into some particular discipline, although all them are overflowed by Marx's work. One should ask, recalling the interesting position of Manuel Sacristan, if a fetishistic vision of science has not prevailed amongst Marxists insofar as science was becoming increasingly more subordinated to the general dynamic of capital. In the contemporary moment, the readings of the work of Marx have not substantially changed, and if anything, the focus has become even more fragmented. Certainly, the economic reading of capital remains strong. This is particularly the case after the economic crash of 2008, where economists who are lucid Marxist scholars have carried out eternal discussions. But at his side are the philosophical readings also proliferating as is natural amidst the deteriorated political, social, and economic world. Apparently, philosophy is good refuge when it is difficult to find an exit from a world on the verge of destruction. Strengthening of the Hegelian readings of Marx, there are those who sustain without hesitation that Capital, the book, is embodiment of German idealism. About they have also proposed some refreshing new questions. But above all, we now have the philological readings of Marx, such as the which he have led the Mega 2 project. To this we owe the current impulse to read Marx again, to rediscover him, to disinherit old ideas, to question the manner in which we have read his work, to see it as is, unfinished, in constant revision with variants. This same readings is a vision that most overlooks the meaning, motor and internal flame of Marx's work. The politics of Marx bothers them. They are connected by the connection of Marx's work with the world of struggle, a struggle of which Marx played a fundamental part and to which he subordinated everything. In these readings, once again, I'm feeding upon postmodern discourse. Marx is fragmented to an extreme degree, and the political is removed from the currents that run through his work. In that sense, for example, Roberto Finecchi suggests in a new reading of Capital that we must take into account the high level of abstraction of this work regarding the capitalism system. But it shows also how fragile is the formal way in which the praxis has been understood. Therefore, today, he writes, Finecchi writes, it seems to me that from a political perspective, the theory of capital gives us types of things. One, to not immediately derive a praxis from that theory. Two, use the theory as a concept proposal for a later concretion. I believe that in correspondence with that fragmentation of the work of Marx, that has allowed it to understand disposed of the political, the praxis has been understood actually composed of two different elements, the theory and the practice, that there is that to unite. A unite that so results always formal. For Marx, instead, the praxis is a single activity whose characteristic is precisely that not separated its elements, because not the concept in essence different. It's a single activity, critical, that results so revolutionary, such as insisted Marx. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elvira. Elvira told me that Elvira told me that writing English is okay, but conversational English is not very okay with her. So she would need a translator. Whose translation you trust most? So we will open for question answer session now, and you can ask your question in English. That will be translated to her, and probably she will answer in Spanish, and it will again translate it to you in English.
¿Se entendió algo?
So the translator has the first question. I wanted to ask to Elvira if she would not be open to reconsider this old distinction of Louis Althusser related to the epistemological break in the light of this new complex form that the intellectual production of Marx is taking today after the publication of the Mega. In few words, can we still say today that there is this epistemological break that you quoted in your text, that in my opinion is very much focused on the early writings and also on the debate that took place in this particular period, not only of Marxism but also of human histories, the important period of existentialism that used a lot the manuscript of 1844, and later the Althusserians who criticize this excessive use of the manuscript of 1844. Traduciendo para ti, y si tú crees que es necesario reevaluar la diferencia que Althusser puse entre el Marx científico y el joven Marx más humanístico, considerando que hoy tenemos mucho más materiales y que podemos hacer una discusión de Marx, una redescubierta de Marx que no está localizada sobre todo en la polémica de los escritos de juventud, de los manuscritos de juventud, sino hay muchísimo más que la nueva Mega nos está mostrando, del último Marx, de los diferentes esbozos del Capital.
Okay, let me try, and can I follow on to yours. I don't know whether it's a question or not, but the whole idea of totality can be seen from various perspectives. And you have this Lukácsian idea of praxis as totality, which you, in the end, you came back to. But again, this Althusserian idea that Marx was inaugurating a new science, and that was science of history. And this fragmentation of Marx into various disciplines is nothing but the political struggle of knowledge. So in the knowledge world, once a new thing comes in, then the whole relationship is disturbed. So what happens is that the old power structure tries to rearrange it by appropriating different aspects of this new science. So there again is the sense of totality in the sense that it is a completely new discipline. But it is not a totality of Lukácsian type, where you have the idea of reification and then appropriation through praxis and etc., etc. So again, I mean, you have this idea of holism in quantum physics in opposition to Newtonian physics, and you have holism in Shrafa in opposition to neoclassical. So one can look at it from various perspectives. I would just like to know, how do you see the whole idea of totality in Marx, and to what extent you will think that Althusserian idea is very, very, in my opinion, is an intellectual idea, is an idea that Marxism is a way of understanding, right? Rather than necessarily related to change, though his rhetoric remains revolutionary, but the basic idea you get is very intellectual, that it's a way of understanding the world. But that way of understanding the world could be holistic.
I'm going to translate this in a very, very condensed way. y la pregunta por Elvira es otra vez alrededor de Althusser, pero con una particular importancia al concepto de totalidad. Porque Althusser pone el tema de una nueva ciencia, pone el tema del marxismo como lucha por el conocimiento, y la cuestión es cómo ves tú la totalidad en Marx y qué piensa del concepto de Althusser, que siguiendo las últimas consideraciones de la pregunta es una idea de marxismo que es muy cerca al marxismo como forma de conocimiento, es una idea muy intelectual del marxismo y no tan política como otras interpretaciones.
Questions, comments, please?
Sí.
Should we take a few more then?
Ok. Muchas gracias y me excuso por mis errores y esta necesidad de traducción. Creo que mi trabajo pretende eso, justo en el momento actual, revalorar las discusiones que tuvo a lo largo de su historia el marxismo alrededor de estas distinciones que tienen ciertas razones de ser en el momento específico en que se postulan. Y no quiero entrar en el detalle de cuáles son esos momentos, ese momento de Althusser, por ejemplo, para poner en juego en un momento en que está saliendo los manuscritos económico-filosóficos que han sido recién publicados y conocidos y en los que Althusser encuentra que hay demasiado encanto del mundo marxista por esta obra.
Now we can stop. So many thanks. I apologize for needing the translator. My work, what I'm trying to do is to reevaluate a discussion about this kind of distinctions that we are debating today. And I would like to place this kind of distinction in their epoch, in their debate, in their historical context, like for the case of Althusser, which collocates his idea, his concept, at the time where the economical philosophical manuscript of 1844 were just published.
Soy de la idea de que la obra primera de Marx anuncia mucho de lo que será su trabajo posterior y creo que la valoración que en su momento se hizo sobre los manuscritos también tenían la pretensión de frenar estas visiones cientificistas, deshumanistas o antihumanistas que proliferaban. Eso puso en el centro para muchos marxistas esta obra primera de Marx. ¿Quieres que hasta ahí?
Thanks. I believe that we can find in Marx's early writings a lot that later appeared in Marx's later writings. So there is a lot of announcement, anticipations. And the other topic is about this debate between anti-humanism and anti-scientific Marxism that was debated at the time, right?
Bueno, creo que ahora tenemos mejores posibilidades, espero, en el sentido de que tenemos el material para hacerlo, para efectivamente revalorar la obra en su conjunto y entenderla en un proceso como es que ocurrió efectivamente, sin estos cortes que desde mi perspectiva Althusser introdujo arbitrariamente.
Today is very different because we have all the materials and we have the entire production of Marx, and then we can see better what, for example, Althusser introduced in an arbitrary form, in my opinion.
Pero tenemos algo en contra y es el capitalismo de nuestros días, nada más. Que ha fragmentado todo más, que el conocimiento está hiper especializado, que tenemos unas condiciones culturales que implica el posmodernismo, que nos da una visión fragmentada del mundo de manera mucho más acusada que en tiempos anteriores, de tal forma que esto, según lo que yo he expresado, ha pronunciado más que superado esas formas anteriores de ver a Marx.
But today we also have something against this, and this is contemporary capitalism. And I believe you mentioned the ideological aspect of contemporary capitalism, which is the division of the disciplines inside knowledge, the specialization of each discipline, and also postmodernism with whatever it brings with it.
Thank you, Professor. Es un gran y largo tema el de la totalidad, pero sí creo, como usted lo menciona, que la visión de Althusser terminó siendo bastante más teoricista o intelectualista de lo que él mismo quería.
This topic of the totality is very big, and I believe that in the end the position of Althusser was more theoretical than Althusser himself wanted to be.
No puedo detenerme aquí en los múltiples aspectos que implica este tema de la totalidad en Marx, pero quiero señalar que no solo lo entiendo a la manera de Lukács como el método que utiliza Marx, sino como una postura epistemológica que implica el horizonte desde el cual está conociendo Marx.
There are many aspects of totality in Marx. Obviously, I cannot comment to all of them, but I would like to say that I share the approach of Georgi Lukács, in particular about method and epistemology.
Y en esto me gusta recordar que Marx no solamente fue muy importante para el movimiento de los trabajadores, sino que el movimiento de los trabajadores fue importante para Marx, fundamental para Marx.
And I would like to remind that not only Marx was very important for the working movement, but also the working movement was very important and relevant for the elaboration of Marx's own ideas.
Y esta postura implica qué tipo de conocimiento produce ese movimiento mismo, cosa que no estamos acostumbrados a analizar. Lo personificamos en ciertos intelectuales, pero los movimientos producen un tipo de conocimiento y de horizonte, de preguntas, de problemas planteados. Y esto es lo que le dio el movimiento a Marx.
This position implies what kind of knowledge is produced, because social movements, in this case the working movements of the time of Marx, also produced a kind of knowledge, a specific kind of knowledge, and also a political horizon, a political view that was important for Marx.
En esa dirección entiendo la totalidad como un asunto político, como una postura política de lo político, no de lo contingente, es decir, la idea de lo político como estas relaciones que amalgaman al conjunto de la sociedad, es decir, como este canal hacia la comprensión y la transformación de la totalidad.
And in this case, I also see the political as something that is related to the whole of society and not only to different parts that are that are to be put in relation with more specific and partial topics. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elvira. We have run out of time, so